Welcome to Mededia. My name is Furqan. I'm a Mededia intern, and today I'll talk about step one in this video. This video is made under the mentorship of Dr. Tariq. A little bit introduction about me. I scored a 268 in step one. I graduated in April 2021. It took me approximately 1.5 years of preparation with school course, and I'm really excited to share this journey since I read a lot of experiences during my preparation. This is my score. I tried to cover as many topics as I could while maintaining the balance of details and conciseness. Here are the topics that I've covered: the basics, pass-fail conversion, goal setting, tracking progress, timeline, resource, frequently asked questions, test day biohacks, and regrets. Since you are on this video, I'm sure you know about step one, but to summarize, step one is the first exam in a series of licensing exams required to pass to practice in US. It is an 8-hour long exam with 1 hour of break. It has 280 questions divided in 7 1-hour blocks, and each block has 40 questions. It is taken in prometric centers around the world, and it costs around $1,000. I've tried to summarize the registration process. The first step is to create a USMLE ID from ECFMG Online Services. Then we have to apply for something called the ECFMG certification, the Form 186, and once it's approved, we fill the step 1 application form. After filling and paying, the application is accepted, which can take around 10 to 30 days, and this also has some involvement from your medical school, which verifies your status as a student or a graduate. After the application is accepted, a scheduling permit is issued by the ECFMG, which is used to register for a date in the Prometric website. So the question is, why do we care about this exam so much? The reason is the score of step 1 is an important factor to get matched in the US. Here is a chart with the average scores of matched and unmatched applicants of different specialties. If we go through it in general, matched applicants have a higher average score. For example, in internal medicine, the average for matched is around 238 and for unmatched is around 225. And this is true for most of the other specialties. Before we move on, let's talk about the elephant in the room. USMLE Step 1 is changing from its 3-digit score results to pass-fail results for test takers tested after January 26, 2022. But note, if you already have a 3-digit score, example, if taken before January 26, the 3-digit score will remain and it won't change to pass-fail automatically. Now, what is the impact of this change? There's a lot of discussion about this, but to summarize, Step 2 CK would become the new Step 1, as in the programs would use the CK scores to make decisions. It would be an important factor. And secondly, the extracurriculars become more important. Example, research, United States clinical experiences, and networking. So what are some of the things we as students, test takers, tested after January 26 can do about this change? Well, we know the impact, so we can predict the recommendations as well. So we can focus more on passing step 1 and diverting the extra time and focus to scoring better on step 2. And secondly, we can also focus more on the extracurriculars. Before we move on, we also need to talk about one thing, which is that even though we'd be diverting our attention to step 2 CK, we cannot fail step 1. Pass fail is not an excuse for cursory preparation of step 1 because failing step 1 is something that should not happen at all. And if it does happen, the pathway moving forward becomes very hard. And if you feel that spending a lot of time in step one versus step two, uh, and if you feel that you're spending a lot of time in step one versus spending time in step two, remember that the human body is the same. It doesn't matter which exam you're studying for, step one, step two, or step three, the information will overlap. So much so, I felt 70% of step two content was step one content. So, so as a general rule, focusing on step one will never hurt. And if you can score around 230 to 240 in step one assessments, give step one, move on, and then focus on step two. Before beginning, setting a goal is very important. As a general rule, aim for a 250, uh, but the goal setting depends on certain factors. For example, the time available, your baseline skills, and your personal ability. By time available, I mean, example, you're early in your medical school versus somebody who's graduated. By baseline, I mean your person A who performs very well in medical school versus person B who did not perform very well due to lack of effort. And personal ability is something that we um, tend to ignore, but it's very important to be vocal about it and discuss it to make the process very efficient and smooth. Let's say we have person A performing at a certain level, example 240, even after 100% of efforts, versus person B who also puts in 100% of effort but can consistently score 260. So knowing this really helps to streamline the process and move on. But one thing to note about this personal ability is to make sure that 100% of effort has been put in. If you're somebody who's consistently improving after putting in more effort, then you have not maxed out your efforts yet. So keep on putting in effort. It is important to track progress to see personal progress, uh, since comparing with other experiences can be misleading. Important to track your NBME scores and aim a little higher every NBME until the goal score is reached. As a general rule, once your goal score is reached or you reach a very consistent plateau, give the exam and move on. So this is how I track my progress. These are my assessments. These are my assessments, the scores, and the date I gave them on. I did one NBME before I began UWorld to check my baseline, which was NBME 18, and I scored a 259. But note that by this time I had done some amount of RxQ Bank and Amboss. Also, one thing I would like to mention is originally I planned to give the exam on April 16, but COVID happened, and after 6 cancellations and 4 months later, I was able to finally give the exam on August 10. So this is my overview of my timeline. For the first and second year of MBBS, I studied 100% of school coursework, but I did use Pathoma and Costanzo. I mentioned this because Pathoma and Costanzo are review resources for step one, and I used them in my preclinical years for my school coursework. Third year dived into the USMLE prep. This was not dedicated, this was still with my school coursework, but I used some of the step one review resources a lot more. For example, I ended up doing Pathoma really well this year. Other resources that I did do were Golian, Sketchy Micro and Farm, Kaplan Biochem, and Kaplan Physio. But I would like to mention that I did Pathoma really well in third year, even before beginning first aid in fourth year. For fourth year was when my real step one prep began. I bought first aid, so I did first aid boards and beyonds and Anki simultaneously. And once I was done with it, once I was done with one read of each, I started Q banks, which were RxQ Bank and Amboss. In fifth year, I did UWorld one time and then the NBMEs, and by mid fifth year, I gave my step one. These are the resources that I use that I recommend. We'll talk in detail about some of these and how I use them. First aid, the most important review resource. Aim to understand every part of it. Perfect summary of majority of what can appear on the exam. So there's one question that people ask a lot. Should I do one round or more than one round? Well, it depends. Either is fine. I had one official round, but I also went through the same information using other mediums, for example, Boards and Beyonds and Anki and UWorld. But it depends, whatever makes you feel more comfortable. Whatever you feel is right according to your situation. If you feel you're learning more with each round, then go for it. How to use it? There are many ways to use it. Going back to the one sample method is to some sample methods include going back to back through the whole book once, and then if comfortable with the material, only refer it while doing questions. Example, you will basically doing one round. And the second method is going back to back more than one time to consolidate the material before moving on to question banks. Once again, do what makes you feel comfortable. I personally prefer method one, which is going back to back through the once and going back to back through the book once and then only referring it while doing questions, because I feel this is more active and this method focuses on material that is more commonly tested in QBanks. Bose and Beyond's amazing review material aligns perfectly with first aid. Dr. Ryan explains principles very, very well. I annotated notes on hard copies of BNB notes, can be annotated separately or also on first aid. I strongly recommend Bose and Beyond's for physio, biostats, biochem, and immunology. But I skip Bose and Beyond's for micro and most of patho because for patho I use Pathoma and for micro I use Sketchy. I would like to mention the reason I annotated notes on hard copies of BNB and not on first aid was to make sure my first aid copy remains as clean as possible and as focused as possible so that later on, if a review of first aid is required, it's easier versus a copy of first aid with BNB notes, which can virtually double the size of first aid. And first aid already is very daunting. That's number one resource for pathology. Start it from day one. First and last resource for pathology. Master every principle in this, please. And I personally mastered this resource even before buying first aid. Now, what is mastering? Mastering means understanding first and also memorizing to such an extent that you remember the position of the treatment of a disease on the page. Obviously, you don't have to do this actively, but the idea is to make this material second nature to you. For me, mastering involved more than full read, which I did with my school coursework, but with an intention to do it for steps. This brings me to an important principle, the intention. Intention matters because most of the time for school exams, we study for a particular exam and then tend to forget it. But if the intention is to do it for steps, which can be years away, we tend to master it for long term. And you can use this principle for any of the resources. Anki. Anki is a flashcard application. There are amazing pre-made decks available online. The best one right now, I think, is Anking. I personally use Zanki and Lolnatikov for micro. Anki was a game changer for me since the act of memorization was very hard for me, and Anki made the process simple. Simple because of three reasons. It made the actual process of memorization easier because Anki promotes active recall, which is basically a principle that promotes you to actively think of the answer when prompted to. For example, A flashcard might have a question like, what is the hormone released when ventricles are stressed? And you would actively think of BNP. So this automates the process, this whole thing automates the process of memorization. Secondly, Anki is very focused. What I mean by that is you see one particular detail on the screen at a time, and you're more likely to absorb it. Versus, let's say the same detail, if present in first aid on a corner, there's a chance uh, we would not focus on it and not absorb it. And the third reason Anki makes the process simple is because Anki works on the principle of spaced repetition. And spaced repetition is a method where you are asked to remember a certain fact with certain time intervals. So, for example, you're asked about the histology of non-caseating granuloma. You see it on day 1, and then you see it on day 5, and then on day 20, and more, and so on. Look for anking. To learn about Anki, look for anking tutorials on YouTube to learn how to use Anki from A to Z. Also note, I would like to mention one more thing is ideally Anki should be used the way it's meant to be, which is maximizing reviews each day. But this can be very time consuming with little to no yield, so it's okay if it's not done the way it's meant to be. I personally didn't focus on reviews actively a lot, even though I mentioned spaced repetition when talking about how Anki makes life easy. I personally aimed at finishing the new cards, and I would only do reviews if I have some extra time and opportunity available. UWorld, best question bank, no doubt, is some questions that I do get about UWorld is that it's okay to spend long time reviewing your blocks. It took me and most people I know more than 7 hours. Random versus system depends. Either is fine. I did random system preferably for someone who is using UWorld at an early stage, example concurrently with first aid. Random preferably for someone who is using UWorld at the end after mastering other resources. One round versus more than one round depends. Either is fine. I did one round plus wrongs. One round for someone who reaches a goal scores and feels he or she would get no extra yield in the second round since questions would be in their memory. More than one round for somebody who keeps on improving and doesn't plateau with the first round, right? Boss Q bank. This is something I have to talk about this Q bank because it's so good. It's so good, especially for challenging questions. If you're somebody who's looking for a challenge, then definitely go for this. I did this before you all to challenge myself and only did the 3, 4, and 5 hammer questions. Hammer is basically the level of difficulty which ranges from 1 to 5, 5 being the hardest. And also note Amboss has very good explanations. But sometimes Amboss can be more challenging than the real exam, so only do it if you have the time and opportunity to do it. Here I'll talk about how I structured my actual studying, and the structure is basically layering. For phase 1, which was the foundation, the first read, I would layer one material over the other for each section. So first I would watch and annotate B&B videos of a section, example biochem. Right after that, I would do the new cause of that particular section on Anki, and then I would do that section on first aid and Pathoma. After the 3 layers, I'd move on to the next section, example immunology, and repeat. The reason I did this is because it provided me with 3 reads of the same material with spaced repetition. Also, learning the same information in 3 different mediums. This helps in understanding, retaining more information versus looking at the same page of first aid for hours. And by the time I reached first aid, which was the 3rd layer, the information had reached my mind from more digestible resources, example boson, beyonds, and Anki, which made going through first aid very smooth. And all of us know that first aid can be very daunting. By 3 different mediums, what I mean is watching a video, active recall and flashcards, and then reading first aid. So these are three different ways of taking in the same information. This is how I layered while doing questions. The result was I would do a UWorld question, then I would refer to the first section of that topic. And the result was spaced repetition of more frequently and tested materials versus other topics. These are some frequently asked questions. Is it important to make notes from UWorld? Yes, preferably, but not necessarily, as I personally didn't make any. How to make notes from UWorld, annotate on first aid, make notes separately on a journal or OneNote, make personalized Anki cards. Should I rewatch Sketchy more than one times? Not necessarily. I went through it once in third year. For revision later, I went through the new cards of LOL Nautical Anki deck. Are there any reliable score predictors available? Yes, the most reliable is the Reddit score predictor found at Reddit, step one. Any concise review of anatomy close to test date? Yes. 100 concepts of developmental and gross anatomy, you can find it online. Do I need extra material for ethics, communication, biostats? Depends. Bose and Beyonds and Amboss was excellent for biostats for me. For biostats, I also did the $25 biostat course by UWorld. For ethics, I tried 100 cases by Conrad Fisher, but I don't know if it helped since instincts was what I used most of the time answering the questions. We prepare for this exam for years and months, but we tend to not prepare for the actual test day we're supposed to perform on. And I have personally heard about bad experiences on test day that could have been avoided with a little bit of preparation. Bad experiences like not getting sleep the night before, feeling drowsy because of a heavy meal or a medication. Thanks to Dirty Medicine's video on YouTube, which helped me with my test day prep. To summarize, wake up very early the day before, exercise a bit to tire yourself, stop studying by noon maximum, sleep early, wake up early, have a light breakfast, example oatmeal, and a black coffee, no sugar. Why? Because to avoid the insulin spike during the test, which makes you feel drowsy. 8 hours later, you're done. Things you can do during the test, take a break after every block, preferably. Uh, Skip the tutorial to add the 15 minutes in the break time to make a total of 60 minutes of break time. Instead, take the tutorial at home. Wear something very comfortable. Have caffeine gums, cold coffee, and light snack, example protein bars, to power through them in the middle of the exam. Have a light lunch after the fourth or fifth block. And one important principle is to save longer breaks for later blocks. This is the ideal sample test day with break. So these are the blocks. And this is the break time between the blocks. And look at this principle which I highlighted here to save longer breaks for the end. Also, additionally, there's strong recommendation. I strongly recommend to only use or consume products that you have had some experience with. Example, some people tried Red Bull for the first time during the exam and things can go bad. Example, allergic reactions, headaches. Also, a lot of test takers opt to use sleep aid before the test day. Only use a sleep aid that you have had some experience with. For example, some people use benzos, and benzos can have some hangover effects on the day after, which is the test day. So you don't want to be sleepy on the test day, right? Some of the sleep aids people use are melatonin, benzo, or diphenhydramine. I personally use diphenhydramine. In addition, I also took the free 120 at the Prometric Center to get accustomed to the testing environment and to avoid any surprises on test day. This cost me about $150. This requires a separate scheduling permit, which you can get after you get the scheduling permit for your main exam from this website. On this website, On this website, click on register for a practice session, and this is how you apply for the scheduling permit. Once you receive the scheduling permit for the practice session, about a week later, use the scheduling permit to register for the practice session from the Prometric website by clicking here. Any regrets? Not many regrets, but I feel I could have focused more on execution versus planning and discussion about the exam. What I mean by this is we tend to spend a lot of time talking about the test. Example, you would discuss about the resources with friends, make plans. You would discuss about questions excessively. You would discuss about other people's experiences. I personally did all this too. Uh, but imagine this situation, which is a very similar situation. It's not rare, where there's person A on day one who's deciding to study for step one, and even on day 90, person A is still planning about the preparation. So looking back, I would prefer to avoid all this and focus more on the basics and execution. And this is exactly what I did for my CK. Thank you. And if my final thoughts, hard work and consistency is key throughout the journey. Also, if possible, try to be around or create a circle of people with similar goals. I was fortunate to be blessed with a very strong group of individuals, and I personally feel that this was my constant source of motivation. And this comes from the friendly competition you have between your friends, and also never give up and never lose hope. So one thing I would like to talk about is, uh, yeah, that's it. Thank you. Good luck.